Need a laptop that's built to perform and designed to last all day? Select Windows 11 PCs starting at $499.99 are now at Best Buy. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
I wrote a little song to remind you, Choice Hotels get you more of the experiences you value. The Cambria Hotel's got it all. A rooftop bar, have a ball. Bring a date, your squad, or even your mom. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this feature edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. We continue our celebration of Huntfish 250, our nation's birthday. Just a great series we've had so far, looking at conservation before and after our founding, the evolution of that in the 1900s, really taking a look at conservation and what we didn't get right early on and how we got that right through Roosevelt and Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson and so on. And then, bringing it up to speed with Taylor and Jeff Crane about current legislation. CSS is working alongside with our CSC members in the state level, species profile in the wild turkey with Rob Keck and fisheries, and our conversation last week with Johnny and JP Morse, which is just outstanding. And now it's my great pleasure. We wanted to bring somebody on that had a unique experience legislating bills that would leave a legacy, and we continue with that legacy theme in welcoming in congressmen from the beautiful state of Montana. I've been all over this country, and it's one of my favorites. I'm going to stay here in New Hampshire, unlike probably most of the people immigrating to Montana. It's getting crowded out there, but Congressman Zinke was in first Trump administration, the Secretary of DOI, and now joins us as a congressman from Montana and is doing great things. Congressman, thanks so much for carving out the time on this busy Independence Week.
Well, great to be with you. And I think we're both really passionate about conservation. And it is 250 years of our country. And, in our country's history, we've had some great champions of conservation, Roosevelt, Muir, Pinchot. And they faced, 100 years ago, a little over when Roosevelt, they faced a different environment. And he had the vision to look out the next 100 years. And a lot of the West is a reflection of Roosevelt's vision of protecting and utilizing, the checkerboard, our public lands, largely out West. And I think the challenge ahead of us today is how do we maintain and protect for the next 100 years? Because as you point out, things have changed. Out West, there's more people, there's more fences, and system health, what happens upstream affects downstream. And looking at now using science, best practices, greatest term, greatest good, that's the conservation ethic of looking at our systems and making sure that we protect that outdoor experience that we enjoy growing up. We need to make sure that experience is available to the next generation and beyond.
No doubt. And it continues to be more challenging as we see participation kind of dropping off here in the last 3 or 4 years. We see those trends. And to us in the space, it's significant statistically. If you look at the numbers, it's 3 or so points percentage wise. But that's a big deal to us. And that tees up the first thing I wanted to touch to is lacking that participation. Our unique funding system, which is the envy of the entire world, is that sportsmen and women put that on their backs starting in 1937 and found a way to self-fund this system to implement good conservation practices through the excise tax and Pittman-Robertson and later Dingell-Johnson. In 2017, I had the pleasure of getting to meet you here in New Hampshire. You came to Hooksett, New Hampshire as the director and the secretary of DOI, and you got to highlight both of those programs in a ceremony where you got to talk to people about the $1.1 billion that was going to be dispersed to all 50 states through those license sales matched at the federal level. Can you talk about the importance of those programs from that perspective in the DOI?
Well, a lot of it is structured as user fees because those of us that hunt and fish, when you buy ammunition, a portion of that goes into a fund that is in used by the federal government to distribute for conservation funds. But you're right, it's under pressure because over time there are far less people out in the woods hunting. Fishing is remains stable, but there is less income coming in. So actually, I'm an advocate of those users of our public lands. If you use it, then I think you have an obligation, to also support it. And we're looking at expanding, on LWCF, Land Water Conservation Fund. All that funding comes primarily from offshore oil, but I think we ought to look at onshore anything that develops wealth from public land. I think there's a greater responsibility to preserve and protect those public lands and reclamation. That would mean solar farms, wind farms, fossil fuel, those type of activities that gain wealth from public land. Again, I think they have an obligation to also contribute. So I think we should expand the revenue base of LWCF. Like Pittman Bowl, there's a lot of people, hikers and backpackers. When you're buying a backpack, generally you're going to use that backpack on public land. And we're not talking about school backpacks. We're talking about equipment, go a hike and those type of things. But I think we should look at expanding the revenue base so we can protect the systems that we all enjoy and feel passionate about. Clearly, as things have changed in the West, I think we do need to focus on watersheds. We need to focus on flyaways, on wildlife corridors, making sure those systems remain healthy for generations to come. And a lot of it is looking at the revenue of people that use those, the outdoors. And I think generally, I think most people are very favorable of it because they enjoy it and they want to go back the next year, make sure the trails
Mhm.
maintained, make sure that there's fish and wildlife and things to watch, and our refuges should be healthy so we can enjoy the legacy of hunting and fishing.
You're teeing up something you got to do as secretary. I want to get to that, but before I do, I want to finish this thought on the self-funding American system of conservation funding thought. And I'm curious, outside of the 226 members of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus down there on the Hill, your colleagues, and really we have this challenge within our own community of telling this story, telling our history, how it's self-funded as a juxtaposition to the rest of how America is funded through taxes and income tax and sales tax. We don't put that burden upon the general public. It's on our community, and we're happy to do it. Almost 100 years of doing it. How do your colleagues respond to you when you tell this story? Say, hey, we can't be messing around with this. We have to continue to reauthorize these programs and find ways to bolster them.
I think we can all do a better job, quite frankly, of educating. And I'll use the example of a recent threat about public lands, sale of public lands. Now, growing up in Montana and enjoying the outdoor experience, I never in my life would I ever even conceive that public lands would be threatened to be sold. Most of the discussion has been through, how to manage it better. The Mears are preservationists. The Roosevelts more are multiple use with Pinchot and that. But a lot of the discussion and sometimes passionate, debate between the two sides is how best to manage it for the future. But when the public lands threat occurred, and on the east side, when national parks were removed from that, a lot of people on the East Coast, the public lands experience is the national parks. or in New York, the state park is enormous. But it's those parks. But what oftentimes is not well understood is out in the West, you have Forest Service land of millions of acres. You have BLM land, Bureau of Land Management land, and those lands really are the experience of the West. But uh, there was a lack of, I think, understanding because when you take one side and said, well, if you're going to sell public land and don't worry, your park next door is not affected, then there wasn't the passion of the members to stand fast and say, no, we're not going to sell our legacy. We're going to talk about the management side. But I think we need to do a lot better job, I think, educating the public. And we need to do a better job of making sure we utilize our public lands in the best interest and go back to what I would say the pin show model of conservation, which is best science, best practices, greatest good, longest term. And that is really the American conservation ethic. And certainly we can do a lot better job of managing. Then out west, there is a lot of frustration because when you live in a sea of trees, but you're restricted primarily by frivolous lawsuits, 1,000 of them, and there we need to correct the bills. But when you can't harvest a single tree, but yet you watch season after season these catastrophic fires that burn the forest down,
Mhm.
which would adversely affects habitat and watershed. And look, if you're a climate change activist or a denier, it doesn't relieve you of the responsibility of managing. And when you can't even do a prescribed burn, and then you watch a month later the entire forest in hundreds of thousands of acres and billions of dollars of damage because we can't find our way to manage, that's an issue. But I think we do need to do a better job of education and why management, active management, produces better results.
Yeah, I completely agree. Um, I kind of teased a little bit about the country all descending on Montana because of TV shows and people wanting their little slice of heaven out there. That does bring actual challenges in that education and we talk about assimilation as a country in totality when you look at immigration on a bigger meta scale, but when you move to a state like Montana, you coming from the East Coast or California, these big metropolitan type states, you got to assimilate and understand the culture and how things are managed. And it's shocking when you talk about timber harvest to people in the East. They see this Lorax type idea of speaking for the trees and not doing anything with them and end up having this worthless stand of old growth forest that has never been managed. And out there, you guys have fires. Another issue is we talking about wildlife corridors in both migration corridors as well as roads and fences on some of that land and working with ranchers out there, which is also a unique idea to people east of the Mississippi. Can
Yeah.
you talk about and you kind of educated me a little bit, your experience? You were Nat Geographic featured a corridor project for elk that you were witness to, and that got your brain thinking, "Hey, we need to take a look at that." Through that secretarial order that you signed, 3362, which directed federal agencies to partner with Western states to map migration routes that is leading to your current work. That's a pretty big deal. How those challenges that preceded that are happening now, getting to that secretarial order, and then your current work right now with the Wildlife Road Crossing Program Reauthorization Act. Give us the summarization, if you would, on that in the time we have left.
Yeah, well, you're right. The genesis of wildlife corridors was actually I participated in a National Geographic event where the author looked at wildlife corridors of elk moving in and out of the Yellowstone Park and the Yellowstone area. I thought, this is important. And so as we began to then investigate whether it was mule deer and the movement of game, primary ungulates from winter range to summer range, and making sure the system is healthy. And when because over the period of time we've seen the checkerboard system is great, but when people generally buy a piece of land, they'll fence it, and we're seeing a lot more fences out there, and fences in some game. I'll give you a sheep as an example. Generally they don't go around a fence,
Mm.
or they don't go through a fence or over a fence. They'll go around, and sometimes 20 or 30 miles. And then looking at the safety of a road in these corridors, identify where the historic corridors are, and then make sure there's crossing. I think it's beneficial for motorists out there that all of a sudden you're not hitting an elk or hitting a deer late at night, or it's hundreds and thousands sometimes every year accidents out there by hitting game, but also protects the movement of wildlife to make sure that the healthy herds are there. And same thing with flyaways. Generally wind, out there is where the movement of wind is, and that historically has been also where birds migrate. And so, I love to hunt. I love duck. I just don't like my duck pre-sliced. So you have to look at also where you're putting these corridors of wind to make sure you're not eliminating, the bird population. Right now, it's about 1 million birds
Mm.
get caught up in the wind, and a lot of those birds are endangered species. You have American eagles and a number of them. And some is design, some is placement, but I think we should look at it. And I think that's an obligation of us all to make sure that we understand how blessed we are. First of all, this country, to have the wildlife, the hunting experience, our rivers, but also it shares with the responsibility of making sure we manage it for the next 100 years, and that's correcting mistakes that have been made, and then looking at health of the systems, whether it's a watershed or flyaways or corridors, making sure the system themselves are healthy, and that will lead to longer term stability and maintaining the outdoor experience that we love.
The corridors, the crossings get a lot of limelight, and they should out west because you have these, you know, bigger migration patterns for ungulates out there, and it's, people see that and they require more space. But the audience, we've talked about this in the past with past guests, but I want to bring it back up here in the East. These are important topics as well, and in some cases, it's for a lot of non-game species. But here in New England, where we are overrun with whitetail deer, we have a very robust black bear population as well. Those are things you don't want to hit on the roadways, and we have seen success with under road culvert crossings and the like that are designated for black bear down to large spotted salamanders, and that all is interconnected, right, in the bigger habitats and environment. So they're all equally important. It's just you tell people in these are important here. It kind of makes them wake up and say, oh, those Western issues are our issues here in the East as well. So I just bring that up and make sure people understand that the legislation you are partnering on, bipartisan legislation, has importance and has ramifications all across the country.
No, absolutely. And in East and West, we're all one country, and some of the most passionate, enthusiastic conservationists are in Maine and New Hampshire, and we do got to pay attention to the outdoor experience. You mentioned public access, incredibly important. And you shouldn't have to go out and look at an onyx to see where public access is. When I grew up in Montana, a little different, in the 60s and 70s, less people out there. And
Mhm.
look, there was never a problem, going out in Forest Service, because there wasn't any Kelly humps and there wasn't any road closures, and you could go out and enjoy the outdoor experience. But today, a lot more fences, a lot more, private property with fences out there. And I think making sure that the public has access to their public lands, I think it's important, and even the checkerboard system. You say, "Well, corner crossing, etc." And look, if there's a section of land out there that belongs to the public, then reasonable access to make sure that you enjoy and have the opportunity to enjoy your public land because it belongs to everybody.
Right.
I think is fair. It may not be a corner. Somewhere along those 4 miles, there's historic access into that property. If you have a fire, certainly the federal government should have access to put it out, to manage it. And so we need to do a lot better on both sides, on private and public. There's a lot of private owners that can't have access to their property either because the federal government has restricted it.
Mhm.
So I think both sides need to work together to make sure if you have property, reasonable access. I think is a goal, and we should strive to reach that. Again, to make sure the public has an opportunity to enjoy our great legacy.
Yeah, and again, keeping with the theme of this program and the legacy that includes looking forward. And you said those public lands are everyone's public lands. That includes people in the East as well. Everyone, again, you kind of pigeonhole these things into Western issues, but they're not. I have the ability, and everyone listening has the ability to go and put in for a tag, or hell, even just go trout fishing out there. Just go for a visit. Go to Yellowstone and check it out. Go to the national parks, and then go play on public land. That's every bit as much my public land sitting in New Hampshire as it is yours as a Montana resident.
You're absolutely right. And it came up with the sale of public land. And so, look, as secretary, I added, I subtracted, I exchanged in the federal estate. But there's a process. And if you're going to divest of federal land, there needs to be a public, as from New Hampshire to Maine to California, our public land belongs to us all. And therefore, I think all of us should have an input. And then if you're going to divest of public land, particularly out west, the first thing you should look at is our Native American tribes. There are a number of treaties out there that provide historical, cultural, municipal access to public lands that were previously, quite frankly, a lot of times belonged or had the area of influence where that. And so you look at the treaties and make sure that you're maintaining a promise made. Should be a promise kept on treaties. And then you look at, are you going to sell surface, subsurface, water? Out west, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. But it needs to be done in a thoughtful way. And generally, exchanges would make sense if it provides better public access, wildlife corridors. There's a lot of reasons to exchange property, but again, it's a process. You look at it by science. You look at it what's in the best interest of you and I as stakeholders. But I think I think the Sportsman caucus in the House is the largest caucus because the outdoor experience relates to a lot of us. And again, I think we can do a better job of educating why it's important to manage. As an example, grizzly bears. The targeted number of grizzly bears in the Yellowstone is about 500. We probably have around 2,000. So, now the grizzly bears need to go from the endangered species side of protection to management.
Mhm.
There's the right number of bears out there. Let's just manage it. And there's the right number of elk. There's the right number of wolverines and wolves. The optimum number is not zero on any, but let's use best science to make sure that the number of wildlife on our public land. Let's make sure it's managed so the herds remain healthy, the environment remains healthy, and with grizz to make sure that there's areas for grizzlies and there's areas that you do not want grizzlies in. And we're seeing a lot of human grizzly contact because grizzlies are moving further and further and further, and the population is not only recovered, it's accelerated.
Yeah, and you see the same thing when you look at the big cats of our country and the controversy surrounding them. I mean, obviously around the large predators, it's a lightning rod for controversy. But you have states like California where you can't do anything about mountain lion management, and you have little kids and bikers getting scooped off trails because there's no management of these animals.
Or even as you point out, the population of whitetail has exceeded what the environment can offer to make sure that those herds are healthy. And all of a sudden, if you're in town and you got 150 deer in there, I can tell you your garden's not going to do well.
No.
So there's a place for wildlife, and there's a place to manage it. But a lot of people out there, and I respect opinions. But when you get too far on the fringe, where all of a sudden you're naming pine cones, Linda and Debbie and every tree, it is look, that's manage the system well, which means a sustainable harvest, making sure you have the right population and make sure that the herd is healthy. And if you do get hit with chronic waste disease or pine beetle. Let's get after it. Let's get the science leading edge, and let's get ahead of the problem before, in the case of pine beetle, you have millions and millions of acres, and some of these catastrophic fires have been too many dead and dying trees. The fuel load's too high, and we're seeing the consequence.
Yeah, no doubt. Sir, I really appreciate your time. Last couple minutes here. What is your hope, your vision? And we, again, looking forward next 100 or even 250 years. None of us will be here for it, but hopefully our great country standing tall still, and they get to do this all over again at 500 years. What's conservation? What's hunting and fishing look like, at least in 100?
Well, real quickly, I kind of give you a riddle. Let's say you have a trout and a salmon in the same stream, and this is how we manage it today. Let's say you have a trout and salmon in the same stream. Upstream, you have a U.S. National Forest asset. Downstream, you have a dam. So this is how we're managing it. The trout are managed by Department of Commerce through NOAA. The trout are managed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through Department of Interior. The dam system, it's either Army Corps of Engineers or it's Bureau of Reclamation from Department of Interior. The Forest Service property, surface is Department of Agriculture, subsurface is Department of Interior through Bureau of Land Management. And then somewhere along that watershed, you have an Indian compact, no doubt, which is a trifecta of excellence between the tribe itself as a sovereign nation, Department of Interior through of Indian Affairs as an advocate, and the state. So that if you want to make a bridge or change something along a waterway, put a pipeline underneath or a power line over, you literally got to go through three different departments in multiple geographic regions with different leadership and oftentimes conflicting regulation. I mean, what's more important, a salmon or a trout? Water temperature, water flow, all those things. When you have different divisions, we got to come together. And I think a reorganization so you can make the right decision based on science. You don't need seven biologists on the same piece of ground coming with seven different conclusions. So let's look at doing it jointly. What's good for the system itself, for wildlife corridors, and let's look at redoing our management scheme so we can actually take action that's effective. So I think that's a part of it, and I think we're all passionate about the public. And we live in kind of a partisan world of either a blue team or a red team. As far as public lands go, let's go with a red, white, and blue team.
Yeah, amen. Love that. And truly, that's a great note to end on. Our issues are all American issues and visitors' issues, and they're nonpartisan, and all of that doesn't even need to come into play because, to your point, throughout this entire conversation, if we're working with the science, the best science on the ground as it is right now, we can't go wrong. You take the emotion out of it, you take the personal thoughts out of it, and just let the science run its course and lead us. And there's no reason for R's, D's, and anything in between.
No, and we have enormously talented folks in the U.S. Geological Survey and Fish and Wildlife and NOAA. So we have the talent. I think we just have to have the will and the organizational structure to make sure we manage our assets effectively for the next generation. And 250 is a good opportunity to take a look at it and think about it and put action forward so we can protect our greatest asset, which is our public lands and our outdoor experience.
Amen. Sir, I want to thank you for your time. Happy 250. It's been a great pleasure and thoroughly enjoyed this very fast conversation. And, enjoy the rest of the week and all the celebratory stuff going on down there in your home state.
And good luck getting the big fish.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.